my golden sibling's engagement party, my parents told security I had no wedding privileges because I was an uninvited guest. So when I found out, I immediately took back the car I was going to gift them, and they started begging me to come back. My name is Tyler, and I'm 28 years old. This story happened at my sister's wedding a few months back, and honestly, I'm still processing how badly things went down. I had helped cover some of the wedding expenses and even brought an envelope containing a $7,500 check as a gift. But when I showed up to the reception, they didn't even have a proper seat for me. They claimed there were some last-minute changes to the seating arrangements. But looking back now, I realize it was all planned. My sister Victoria is 25, and she was getting married to her fiancé Brandon. I was genuinely excited for them both. These two had been together for 5 years, and I knew they'd been living paycheck to paycheck for most of that time. Money had always been tight for them, which is why I wanted to help make their wedding day special. Victoria had been incredibly stressed about the wedding costs for months leading up to the big day. She kept mentioning to our family how they might have to cut corners everywhere because the venue was absolutely eating their budget alive. Every conversation we had seemed to revolve around money and how they were struggling to afford the kind of wedding they'd always dreamed of having. Being the older brother with a decent job as a marketing coordinator, I felt like I wanted to do something truly meaningful for them. I wasn't talking about just covering some small expense or giving them a modest gift. I'm talking about covering the entire catering bill, which came to $15,000, plus giving them an additional $7,500 in cash specifically for their honeymoon. Yeah, you read that right. This wasn't a "here's $50 for your registry" kind of gesture. This was, holy shit, we can actually afford a real wedding money. I had worked extra freelance projects for months to save up this amount. I even skipped my usual vacation and sold my entire gaming setup to make this financial contribution possible. I told my parents that I was handling the catering costs so Victoria could focus on the other aspects of wedding planning without that massive financial stress hanging over her head. They acted like I was some kind of saint for doing this. They kept saying how generous and responsible I was being, and how lucky Victoria was to have such a supportive older brother. My best friend Connor was supposed to be my +1 for the wedding. He's one of those guys who can smell drama from 3 states away and has absolutely zero filter when it comes to calling out people's nonsense. When I told him about my plan to cover the catering costs, he looked at me like I'd just announced I was joining a cult. "Bro, 15 grand for Victoria?" he said, shaking his head. "The same Victoria who borrowed your Netflix password and somehow managed to rack up 3 new profiles without even asking permission first? It's different, Connor. It's her wedding, right?" I replied, trying to justify my decision. "Because marriage definitely fixes people who take advantage of you," he said sarcastically. Looking back now, I really should have listened to him. The church ceremony itself went fine. It was pretty standard stuff, nothing particularly fancy or elaborate. Victoria seemed nervous throughout the service, but she also appeared genuinely happy. I noticed she barely talked to anyone beforehand, but I figured that was just normal wedding jitters that most brides experience on their big day. Connor and I showed up dressed in our best suits, looking sharp and ready to celebrate. I had the gift envelope tucked safely in my jacket pocket, containing that $7,500 check that I was planning to present to them later. We were both genuinely excited to make their day even more special and memorable. Then we arrived at the reception venue, the same venue that I had literally paid for through covering their catering costs. The irony of what was about to happen wasn't lost on me later, but at the time, I was still completely oblivious to what they had planned. The couple ahead of us in line at the check-in table received these beautiful, elegant name badges. They were gold-trimmed with gorgeous calligraphy and clear table numbers printed on them. The whole presentation looked expensive and very Pinterest-worthy, exactly the kind of detail that makes weddings feel special and well-organized. When my turn came up, the woman behind the check-in table didn't even bother to look up from her clipboard. She simply handed me what can only be described as the saddest, most pathetic piece of paper I have ever seen in my life. It was white, flimsy, and looked like it had come straight out of someone's home printer using the cheapest paper they could find at Office Depot. The text was printed in basic black font and said "Vendor Access Only" in all capital letters. There was no table number, no fancy calligraphy, no gold trim, nothing. Just those 3 words that might as well have said "unwanted" or "second-class citizen." I stood there staring at this piece of paper, completely confused about what was happening. Connor's turn was next in line, and he received a completely normal guest badge, just like everyone else had been getting. He looked at his badge, then looked at mine, then back at his badge again. clearly trying to process what he was seeing. I stood there like a complete idiot, thinking there had to be some kind of mistake. This couldn't possibly be intentional, right? There must have been some mix-up with the paperwork or the printing or something logical that could explain why I was being treated differently from every other guest. Connor looked at both badges in disbelief, then turned directly to the check-in woman. "Yo, what the hell is this?" he said, holding up my vendor badge for her to see. "This guy literally paid for your food tonight. He should be getting the VIP treatment, not whatever this is." The woman just shrugged her shoulders with complete indifference. "I just hand out what I'm told to hand out," she replied, as if she was discussing the weather rather than actively participating in my humiliation. Connor turned to me with an expression of pure shock and anger. "Dude, this is some serious disrespect right here. This is absolutely unacceptable." That's when my mom appeared out of absolutely nowhere, like she had been waiting in the wings for this exact moment to happen. She leaned in real close to me and whispered in a tone that was way too casual for what she was about to say. "That means you eat in the kitchen with the catering staff." Connor's jaw literally dropped open. He stared at my mother like he couldn't believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. "I'm sorry, what now?" he said, his voice rising slightly. My mom just walked away like she had delivered a simple weather report, leaving both of us standing there trying to process what had just happened. She didn't offer any explanation, didn't seem apologetic, and certainly didn't act like there was anything wrong with this arrangement. Connor stared at her retreating figure like he had just witnessed a hit-and-run accident. Did she just tell you to eat in the kitchen at your sister's wedding? The wedding that you literally paid for?" His voice was filled with disbelief and growing anger on my behalf. I decided to walk into the main hall anyway, because honestly, what else was I going to do? Just turn around and leave immediately? Connor followed right behind me, muttering under his breath about next-level family dysfunction and psychological warfare disguised as wedding planning. I could tell he was genuinely upset on my behalf, which somehow made the whole situation feel even more surreal. As soon as we entered the reception area and saw the seating chart displayed prominently near the entrance, reality hit me like a freight train. I scanned that chart multiple times, looking for my name anywhere among the carefully organized table assignments. My name wasn't listed anywhere on that board. Not at the family table with my parents, not at the cousins table, not even at the random plus ones table stuck in the back corner of the room. Connor's name was there though, clear as day. He was assigned to a table near the back with some college friends of Brandon's that he'd never even met before. The contrast was absolutely mind-blowing and made zero logical sense. "This is absolutely insane," Connor said, loud enough for several people nearby to overhear him. "They gave you a vendor badge, but seated your best friend at the normal guest tables? What kind of backwards logic is that supposed to be?" I literally walked around that entire venue looking for my name on any list, any table card, any sign that I was supposed to be there as an actual guest. Connor helped me check twice, methodically going through every single table assignment to make sure we hadn't missed anything. We found nothing. My name had been completely omitted from every guest list in the building. Meanwhile, servers were busy setting up plates at every table around us. The centerpieces were looking all perfect and Pinterest ready. Everyone else was chatting and laughing while finding their assigned seats and taking photos with their phones. The whole scene looked exactly like what you'd expect from a beautiful, well-planned wedding reception. "You know what?" Connor said, after our second complete lap around the room. "I'm not sitting at table 12 while you're getting treated like hired help. This whole thing is completely messed up, and I'm not going to pretend it's normal." And there I was, standing against the wall like I was working security or something at the event that I had personally paid for. I watched as my own family members found their seats, chatted with other guests, and generally enjoyed themselves while I stood there holding a vendor badge like some kind of service employee. Victoria eventually got up to give her speech, and she was all smiles as she thanked everyone for being there. She talked about how much it meant to have all the people we love most celebrating with them on their special day. I'm standing there listening to this speech while literally holding an envelope containing enough money to pay for their entire honeymoon, having already covered their catering costs. And apparently, I wasn't even important enough to warrant a seat at any table in the building. Connor leaned over to me and said, "She really just said all the people we love most, while you're standing here like a bouncer at your own sister's wedding. That's actually impressive levels of audacity. That's when everything finally clicked into place for me. They didn't want me there as family. They didn't even want me there as a regular guest. They wanted me there as a wallet. Someone who would pay for their expenses but stay out of the way during the actual celebration. I was supposed to fund their dream wedding and then disappear into the background like hired help. The catering manager walked up to me during Victoria's heartfelt speech, completely interrupting the moment. "You the guy who paid for this?" he asked in a businesslike tone. "We need you to sign some final paperwork in the kitchen." Connor immediately intercepted him before I could respond. "Excuse me, but this man is a guest at this wedding, not your employee. Maybe handle your paperwork at a more appropriate time when the bride isn't giving her speech." "It's fine," I told Connor, even though nothing about this situation was actually fine. While my sister was up there giving heartfelt thanks to everyone who had made this day possible, I was being escorted to the back of the venue, like hired help to handle vendor paperwork for the meal I had personally paid for. I signed whatever documents they needed me to sign, feeling more humiliated with each passing minute. Then I walked back to the gift table, where I had planned to leave my envelope earlier in the evening. I found my envelope exactly where I had placed it, opened it up right there in front of everyone, and took out the $7,500 check. I said, loud enough for all the nearby people to hear clearly, "Actually, I think you won't need this anymore." Connor was right behind me, ready to back me up. "Yeah, about time. This whole situation has been absolutely insane from the beginning." The whole place went dead silent for what felt like 3 seconds, but probably lasted much longer. You know that moment in movies when the record scratch happens and everyone stops what they're doing? That's exactly what this felt like. Then absolute chaos erupted around us. Chairs started scraping against the floor as people turned around to see what was happening. I could hear people calling my name from different directions, voices overlapping in confusion and panic. Victoria started screaming from across the room, her voice cutting through all the other noise. I could hear my parents behind me yelling, "Come back! Come back!" like we were on the Titanic, and I was jumping into a lifeboat. But you know what? I just kept walking toward the exit. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let their panic or guilt-tripping change my mind. Connor matched my pace perfectly, staying right beside me as we headed for the door. As we were making our way out, Connor called out loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, "Thanks for the entertainment, folks. You really showed your true colors tonight." I have to admit, I appreciated having someone in my corner who wasn't afraid to call out their behavior publicly. We finally got to my car in the parking lot, and Connor just started laughing. It wasn't mean-spirited laughter, but the kind you do when something is so completely ridiculous and absurd that you can't process it any other way. It was the kind of laughter that comes from disbelief rather than amusement. "Dude," he said, shaking his head while catching his breath, "I've seen some serious family drama in my time, but this was absolutely next level. They literally treated you like catering staff at your own sister's wedding that you personally paid for. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried." He was absolutely right. They didn't want me there as family, and that had become crystal clear. But they sure as hell weren't going to profit from disrespecting me either. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, then they could figure out how to pay for their own damn wedding. The text messages started rolling in the very next morning around 6 a.m. First it was my mom, then my dad, then Victoria herself. All of their messages were basically variations of the same theme. "Can we talk? Please don't make this a thing. And let's not ruin the weekend over this." What I found particularly telling was that none of them actually said they were sorry. Not a single one. No apologies, no acknowledgement that they had done anything wrong. No admission that their behavior had been completely unacceptable. Just corporate speak about wanting to talk things through and work this out. Connor came over around noon with coffee and bagels, because he's a good friend who knows that sometimes you need comfort food after dealing with family drama. He'd been getting updates from me via text throughout the morning, but he wanted to see how I was handling everything in person. "So, any groveling yet?" he asked, settling into my couch with his coffee. "None whatsoever," I replied. Just a lot of corporate speak about miscommunication and wanting to talk things through. No actual apologies or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. My mom's text message was probably the worst one of all. She had written, "We thought you'd prefer helping behind the scenes since you always say you don't like being the center of attention anyway." Like I was supposed to be grateful for the privilege of being treated like hired help at my own sister's wedding. Connor read the message over my shoulder and shook his head in disgust. "Oh, that's rich. You don't like attention, so we decided to humiliate you. What's next? We thought you'd enjoy eating scraps because you're always trying to lose weight?" I ignored all of their messages for most of the day. I took a long, hot shower, made myself a proper breakfast, cleaned my apartment thoroughly, and basically let them sweat it out while I processed what had actually happened to me. I needed time to think clearly without their voices in my head, trying to minimize or justify their behavior. By noon, my dad was calling nonstop. After the 5th consecutive call that I let go to voicemail, he finally resorted to texting me. "Come over! We want to talk! Your sister's here too." "You going to go?" Connor asked, watching me read the message. "Yeah, but not to forgive them," I said. "I want to watch them squirm and see what kind of excuses they've come up with." "Mind if I tag along? I promise to behave," Connor said, with a grin that suggested he had absolutely zero intention of actually behaving himself. "You sure about this? It could get pretty ugly, dude." After what I witnessed yesterday, I'm personally invested in this drama now. I need to see how this plays out. When Connor and I walked into my parents' house, all 3 of them were already waiting in the living room. It was set up like some kind of intervention scene you'd see in a movie. They were all sitting there with serious expressions, clearly having planned out this whole meeting in advance. Their faces immediately shifted when they saw Connor walking in behind me. You could tell they weren't expecting an audience for whatever damage control presentation they had prepared. "Oh," my mom said, clearly caught off guard. "Hi, Connor." "Mrs. Peterson," Connor replied with a smile that was probably way too friendly given the circumstances. "Great party yesterday. Really unique seating arrangements you had going on there." My dad shot Connor a look that could have killed, but he didn't say anything in response. I could tell he was already annoyed that this wasn't going to be a private family conversation where they could control the narrative. I sat down in one of the chairs and just waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for them by starting the conversation or asking what they wanted to talk about. They had requested this meeting, so they could damn well explain themselves. My dad went first with some complete garbage about how it was really unfortunate how things went yesterday. Notice that he didn't say they had made things unfortunate, just that unfortunate things had somehow happened to occur, like bad weather or unexpected traffic delays. He was treating the whole situation like it was some kind of natural disaster that nobody could have prevented. My mom followed up with typical corporate speak about miscommunication and logistics issues. She used the word oversight at least 6 times during her little speech, as if my complete exclusion from dinner was just a spreadsheet error that had somehow slipped through their quality control process. "Fascinating," I said when they finally finished their prepared remarks. "So the oversight was what exactly? Forgetting to include the guy who paid for the food, or forgetting to treat him like actual family? I just want to make sure I understand the sequence of oversights that occurred here." Victoria barely said anything meaningful during this whole exchange. When she did manage to speak up, it was just vague nonsense like, "I didn't know that's how it would be," and "I thought you'd understand." Like I was supposed to be some kind of Zen monk who would just float above the humiliation because we share DNA. I listened to their entire damage control presentation, nodding occasionally like I was actually considering their explanations and excuses. I let them think they were making progress, that their carefully rehearsed apologies and justifications were actually working on me. When they finally finished talking and looked at me expectantly, I looked at all 3 of them and said exactly 4 words. "I might change my mind." That's it. Just those 4 simple words. I might change my mind. The shift in the room was absolutely instant and dramatic. My mom's eyes lit up like I had just thrown her a life preserver while she was drowning. My dad exhaled like he had been holding his breath for hours, waiting for some sign of hope. Even Victoria looked directly at me for the first time since I had walked into the house. Connor raised an eyebrow in my direction but stayed completely quiet, letting me play the situation out however I wanted to handle it. You could literally feel their hope thickening the air around us. My mom immediately started talking about how generous and understanding that would be of me. She went on about how the money would go directly toward their honeymoon, and how she didn't want this little thing to hang over the family forever, like some kind of dark cloud. My dad chimed in with some speech about how families have rough patches sometimes, but the strong ones work through them together. He was laying it on pretty thick with the family unity rhetoric. Victoria still didn't say thank you, not even then when she thought she was getting exactly what she wanted. I just smiled, stood up from my chair, and told them I needed some time to think about everything we had discussed. Then I left them sitting there with that single word "might" buzzing in their ears like a promise that could go either way. Connor followed me out to the car, waiting until we were completely out of earshot before he started laughing again. "Dude, that was absolutely beautiful," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "They went from full damage control mode to complete hope mode in like 3 seconds flat. You've got them exactly where you want them now. And I meant it exactly how it sounded. Not yes, not no. Just a long, uncomfortable pause where they would have to hope that someone else would give them what they desperately needed. For the first time in years, they wanted something from me more than I wanted their approval. They had made me stand around hoping for basic respect at their wedding. Now they could stand around hoping for my money while having absolutely zero control over the outcome. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my mom that had been left sometime during the night. She was using that soft, careful voice that people use when they're talking to someone who might be having a mental breakdown. She said she had been thinking all night about how things were handled a little too rigidly at the wedding. Still no actual apology, of course. Just more corporate language about rigid handling, like the whole situation was a shipping mishap rather than deliberate family cruelty. Then came the really interesting part of her message. She mentioned that they were delaying the honeymoon plans. Not canceling them outright, just pushing it back a little due to some unexpected complications. She said it like their vacation plans had hit some mild turbulence that would naturally sort itself out over time. What she didn't say, but what I already knew perfectly well, was that without my $7,500 check, they were completely screwed financially. They had been counting on that money to make their honeymoon dreams a reality, and now they were stuck figuring out how to fund it themselves. That afternoon, my dad called with a completely different approach. He had clearly decided that emotional manipulation wasn't working, so he switched to calculated flattery instead. He told me how proud he was of the man I'd become: successful, stable, dependable, and responsible. He said that not everyone in the family could say the same thing about themselves, which I thought was a pretty interesting way to throw shade at Victoria without actually naming her directly. Then he got to his real point. "We trust your judgment completely," he said. "I know you'll make the right call here, son." They were really laying it on thick now. The fake compliments, the polished concern, the subtle reminders that I was supposedly the reliable one, the mature one, the one they could always count on when things got tough. That's when I remembered something that made me smile for the first time in days. I still had the original catering contract in my email, and more importantly, I still had the final invoice that hadn't been submitted to my credit card yet. The catering company was waiting for my approval before processing the $15,000 charge for the wedding reception. So I decided to call them up and see what my options were. "Hey, this is Tyler calling regarding the Peterson wedding that took place yesterday," I said when someone picked up. "I need to cancel that final payment." "Cancel it, sir. The event already happened, and everything went off without any issues." "Check your contract," I replied. "There's a 24-hour satisfaction guarantee clause included in the terms. I'm formally invoking it." There was silence on the other end while they pulled up the paperwork and reviewed the terms I was referencing. "Well, technically yes, that clause does exist," they admitted. "But this is highly unusual, sir. The food was served on time, the event went off without any problems, and we fulfilled our end of the contract." "The service didn't meet my expectations," I said firmly. "I'm formally disputing the charge based on unsatisfactory service." It took 3 phone calls and 2 follow-up emails, but by the end of the day, they had agreed to reverse the transaction. The catering company would have to eat the cost of the entire reception because their contract included a customer satisfaction guarantee, and I was technically the customer who had signed the agreement. My parents had absolutely no idea this was coming. They thought the catering bill was already paid and settled. Thursday afternoon at exactly 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was my dad, and I could tell immediately from his voice that he was panicking. "Son, the catering company is demanding payment," he said, barely containing his anxiety. "They said you canceled the charge. What's going on here?" "I disputed the charge," I replied calmly. "What? Why would you do that? The service wasn't up to standard." "What does that even mean?" he asked, his voice rising. "Ask Victoria. She was there. She saw exactly what kind of service I received." And then I hung up on him. Connor texted me about an hour later. "Please tell me you're documenting this chaos. This is better than any Netflix series I've ever watched." Within another hour, Victoria was calling me directly. I could hear the panic in her voice before she even started talking. "Tyler, they're saying we owe $15,000 for the catering bill," she said, clearly on the verge of tears. "They want payment by Monday, or they're sending the whole thing to collections." "That's unfortunate," I replied, keeping my tone completely neutral. "You can't do this! This will completely destroy our credit rating!" "Then maybe you should have thought about that before treating me like hired help at my own sister's wedding." She started crying on the phone, but I was completely done being moved by other people's problems, especially when they had created those problems entirely by themselves. "Please," she said through her tears. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly to everyone. I'll tell everyone what we did wrong. Too late for that, I said. You should have thought about consequences before you decided on your actions. That evening, I got another call from my dad, and this time he wasn't even trying to be diplomatic or understanding. His tone had completely shifted from concerned parent to angry authority figure. This is vindictive and petty, he said. You're hurting your sister over nothing but wounded pride. No, I replied calmly. I'm protecting myself from people who clearly see me as nothing more than an ATM machine. We raised you better than this, he continued, trying to guilt me into backing down. Apparently not, I said, and hung up on him again. Connor came over that night with takeout, and we spent the evening playing video games while my phone kept buzzing constantly with increasingly desperate messages from my family. It was actually pretty relaxing to just ignore all the drama while doing something normal and fun. You know what I love about this whole situation? Connor said between matches. They keep acting like you're the problem here. Like you're supposed to just roll over and take being disrespected because family. Let them scramble for a while. Victoria tried a completely different strategy on Tuesday morning. She showed up at my apartment unannounced at 7 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept properly in days. When I opened the door, she immediately started with the waterworks and dramatic pleading. Tyler, please, she said, clearly having rehearsed the speech. Brandon's parents are asking questions about our finances. They're wondering why we suddenly owe all this money when everything was supposed to be covered. I let her stand in the hallway while I went to make myself coffee. I didn't invite her inside because I wasn't interested in making this conversation comfortable for her. They think we lied to them about having the finances handled, she continued from the doorway. Brandon is completely humiliated. His family already thinks I'm irresponsible with money, and now this just confirms all their worst assumptions about me. Sounds like a you problem, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. This isn't just about the money anymore, she said, her voice getting more desperate. This is about my marriage, about my reputation, about my entire future. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was genuinely panicked, mascara smudged, hands shaking, clearly at her wit's end. Part of me almost felt bad for her. Almost. You want to fix this? I asked. Yes, anything, she replied immediately, hope creeping into her voice. Admit what you did publicly. Post it on social media. Tell everyone exactly how you treated me and why you're suddenly short $15,000. Her face went completely white when I said that. I can't do that. Everyone would know we can't afford our own wedding. Everyone's about to find out anyway when this debt goes to collections and ruins your credit, I pointed out. She stood there for a long moment, probably calculating which option would be worse. Public humiliation or complete financial ruin. There has to be another way, she said finally. There is, I replied. Pay it yourselves. And then I closed the door in her face. That afternoon, my parents tried the group approach again. They showed up together at my apartment, with my dad carrying a folder like he was about to present some kind of business proposal. We've talked to a lawyer, he announced as soon as I opened the door. What you're doing might be considered harassment. I actually laughed out loud when he said that. By all means, please sue me for disputing a charge on my own credit card for services that didn't meet my satisfaction. I'm sure that will go really well for you. My mom tried to take the emotional angle while my dad was fumbling with his legal threats. This is tearing the entire family apart, she said. Your sister is having panic attacks. Brandon's talking about annulment because of the debt situation. Maybe she should have thought about that before deciding I wasn't worth a seat at the table, I replied. My dad opened his folder and pulled out some papers. We're prepared to offer you a compromise here, he said, trying to sound official and businesslike. You reinstate the catering payment, and we'll pay you back in installments with no interest required. Counteroffer, I said. Pay the catering company directly yourselves, and we'll call it even on the honeymoon money I was planning to give you. They looked at each other like I had just asked them to donate vital organs. We don't have $15,000 just sitting around, my mom said. Then figure it out, I replied. Sell something, get a loan, ask Brandon's parents for help. Do whatever people normally do when they can't afford things they want. This is our daughter's future you're playing with, my dad said, trying to make me feel guilty. She chose this path when she treated me like hired help at her own wedding, I said. I'm just letting her walk down the road she picked. They left without saying another word, clearly realizing that their threats and manipulation tactics weren't going to work on me. Connor stopped by that evening with food and snacks, ready for another update on the ongoing family drama. So how's Operation Let Them Figure It Out going? He asked. They offered to pay me back in installments, I told him. Oh, that's absolutely rich, Connor said, shaking his head. Hey, can you pay for our daughter's wedding and then let us slowly pay you back for the privilege of being humiliated? These people have zero self-awareness. Wednesday evening, Victoria called me one more time. I could tell from her voice that she was completely desperate and running out of options. The collections notice came today, she said, barely holding it together. They want payment in full by Friday, or they're proceeding with legal action. Okay, I replied, keeping my tone completely neutral. That's it? Just okay? She asked, clearly expecting more of a reaction from me. What do you want me to say? I told you the terms for fixing the situation and you didn't take them. I can't publicly humiliate myself like that. You know I can't do that, she said, her voice breaking. Then enjoy explaining to Brandon's family how you managed to rack up 15 grand in debt in just 3 days, I said, and hung up. Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. All it said was, "Fine, I'll post it." I waited to see if she would actually follow through, or if this was just another manipulation tactic to buy herself more time. Friday morning, Victoria finally posted on Facebook. I have to admit I was curious to see what she would actually say when forced to tell the truth publicly. Her post read, "I owe my brother Tyler an apology. At my wedding last weekend, we treated him terribly, despite everything he had done for us. We excluded him from dinner, made him eat with the catering staff, and generally acted like he didn't matter. Now we're facing financial consequences for our actions, and it's entirely our fault. I'm sorry, Tyler. You deserved so much better." The post got 47 comments in the first hour alone. Her friends were asking what had happened, extended family members were expressing shock and disbelief, and Brandon's relatives were demanding explanations about the whole situation. Connor screenshotted the post and sent it to me with the caption, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got her." My phone rang almost immediately after the post went live. It was Victoria again, and she sounded both relieved and terrified. "I did it. I posted it publicly like you asked. Please fix the situation now." I took a few minutes to read through the comments on her post, watching her social media reputation crumble in real time. People were genuinely appalled at how they had treated me, and many were asking follow-up questions that she was going to have to answer. "Payment's been reinstated," I finally said. "The invoice is clear with the catering company." She started crying again, but this time it was relief rather than panic. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how grateful I am." "Don't thank me yet," I said calmly. The line went completely quiet. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, and I could hear the worry creeping back into her voice. "Because we're not done here. That was just about the catering bill. We still need to talk about the other consequences of your actions." And then I hung up on her, letting her think about what other consequences might mean. I wanted her to sweat it out a little longer and really consider the full scope of what she had done. After Victoria's public confession, the family dynamics shifted completely and dramatically. My parents stopped calling me entirely, probably realizing that their manipulation tactics had backfired spectacularly. Victoria went completely radio silent after our last conversation, likely trying to figure out what my next move would be. The extended family started reaching out to me directly, though. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all of them wanted to know what had really happened at the wedding and why Victoria had posted such a damning confession about her own behavior. Some of the family members were genuinely supportive of my position. My dad's brother texted me, "Saw Victoria's post. What they did was completely messed up. Good for you for standing your ground and not letting them walk all over you." Others tried to play peacemaker and suggested family therapy or mediation. My mom's sister called asking if I wanted her to organize some kind of family meeting where we could all work through this together. I politely declined her offer. But the most interesting development was when Brandon reached out to me directly. He sent me a text Tuesday morning that said, "Hey man, can we talk? Just you and me, no one else involved." We agreed to meet at a sports bar near his workplace. He looked extremely uncomfortable when he arrived, like he would rather be literally anywhere else in the world. "I need you to know that I had absolutely no idea about the seating arrangement thing," he said as soon as we sat down. "Victoria handled all the family arrangements for the reception. I honestly thought you were sitting at the main table with everyone else." I believed him completely. Brandon had always been straightforward and honest, not the manipulative type like the rest of my family had proven to be. "When did you actually find out what happened?" I asked. "Monday morning when the catering bill showed up and they were demanding payment," he replied. "That's when Victoria finally told me everything. About you paying for the catering, about the vendor badge, all of it." He looked genuinely embarrassed and ashamed. "I feel like a complete ass. You covered our biggest wedding expense and we treated you like garbage in return. What exactly did Victoria tell you about why it happened that way? I asked, curious to hear her version of events. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. She said your parents convinced her it would be less awkward if you didn't have to sit through all the family drama and speeches, that you'd be more comfortable helping behind the scenes. And you actually bought that explanation? I didn't know you well enough to question it, he admitted. I figured it was some kind of family dynamic that I didn't understand, so I stayed out of it. I nodded, understanding his position. At least someone was being completely honest with me about what had happened. Look, Brandon continued, I can't undo what happened at the wedding, but I want you to know that Victoria's been a complete wreck since Sunday. She knows she screwed up badly. Good, I replied without hesitation. The public post thing really got to her. People are asking a lot of uncomfortable questions that she's having trouble answering. Maybe she should have thought about that before making me eat in the kitchen at my own sister's wedding. Brandon winced at my bluntness. That's a fair point. We sat in silence for a minute, watching SportsCenter highlights on the TV above the bar. The atmosphere was awkward, but I appreciated that Brandon was at least trying to have an honest conversation. Is there anything that would actually fix this situation? He asked eventually. Because right now, Victoria thinks you completely hate her. And honestly, I'm starting to think maybe you should. That comment caught me completely off guard. What do you mean by that? I've been with her for 5 years now, Brandon said. I know the difference between when she's genuinely sorry about something and when she's just sorry she got caught. This whole situation feels like the second one. That was a really interesting perspective. Her own husband was starting to see through her act and recognize her manipulative patterns. What are you planning to do about that realization? I asked. I honestly don't know yet, but I'm not staying married to someone who treats family members like this, he said firmly. If she can do this to you, what's she going to do to me when things get tough? I had to respect that. Brandon had integrity, even if it meant admitting he had married the wrong person. For what it's worth, I said, I don't think you knew what was happening. You got caught in the middle of their manipulative game. He nodded appreciatively. Thanks for saying that. It means a lot. We finished our food and shook hands outside the restaurant. I could tell he was genuinely struggling with what he had learned about his new wife. That evening, I made my final decision about Victoria and my parents. I was done playing games and done giving them chances to hurt me again. I blocked all their phone numbers completely. I unfriended them on every social media platform. I removed myself from every group chat, family email list, and shared account we had together. I changed my emergency contacts at work and updated my insurance beneficiaries to remove them entirely. If they wanted to cut me out of family events and treat me like hired help, I would make their exclusion of me official and permanent. No more games, no more manipulation, no more opportunities for them to use me as their personal ATM. The next morning, I decided to book that trip to Thailand I had been putting off for months. I used the money I'd originally planned to give Victoria as her honeymoon gift, all $7,500 of it. I booked 3 weeks of all expenses paid travel with accommodations, tours, and experiences I had always wanted to try. Connor was genuinely impressed when I told him about my travel plans. Thailand? Damn, that's like the ultimate middle finger to this whole situation. I respect that level of strategic pettiness. You know what? I said. It turns out that treating yourself right is way more satisfying than letting other people treat you wrong. 2 days before my scheduled flight, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "This is Brandon. Victoria wanted me to tell you that she's filing for divorce. Thought you should know." I stared at that text message for a while, then replied, "Sorry to hear that. I hope you're doing okay through all this. Actually doing better than I have in months," he wrote back. Turns out this wedding incident wasn't an isolated problem. There's a whole pattern of behavior I was blind to. I left for Thailand without telling anyone in my family. No social media posts, no family updates, absolutely nothing. I maintained complete radio silence while I spent 3 weeks exploring Bangkok, Phuket, and Chiang Mai with money that was supposed to be Victoria's honeymoon fund. The trip was exactly what I needed. No family drama, no guilt trips, no entitled relatives expecting me to bankroll their mistakes and poor decisions. Just good food, interesting places, beautiful scenery, and the kind of peace you get when you're completely disconnected from toxic people. Connor House sat for me while I was gone and kept me updated on the chaos back home via text messages. Apparently, my parents had shown up at my apartment twice looking for me, called my office asking if I was okay, and even reached out to some of my college friends trying to track me down. "They're acting like you disappeared into witness protection," Connor texted me. "Your mom asked if I thought you were having some kind of mental breakdown." I told her you seemed pretty together to me, just done with their nonsense. When I finally came back from Thailand, I had 17 voicemails waiting on my phone. Most of them were from my parents, and they got progressively more desperate as the days had gone on. A few were from Victoria, though I deleted those without even listening to them. The messages started out confident and demanding. We need to talk about this situation immediately. By day 10, they had shifted to concerned and worried. We haven't heard from you in over a week. Please call us back. By the end of my trip, they were borderline panicked. If you don't respond to us soon, we're calling the police for a wellness check. I actually laughed out loud at that last message. They were so used to controlling the narrative and manipulating situations that my complete absence had sent them into full meltdown mode. My mom was waiting in the lobby of my apartment building the day after I got back from Thailand. She must have been watching for my car because she was there when I walked in with my luggage, looking like she had been camping out for hours. Where have you been? She demanded as soon as she saw me. We've been worried sick about you for weeks. Thailand, I said simply, walking past her toward the elevator without slowing down. She followed me, clearly not willing to let this conversation end so quickly. Thailand? For 3 weeks without telling anyone where you were going? I told the people who needed to know, I replied. We're your family, she said, as if that should mean something after what they had done. I turned to look at her directly. Are we? Because last I checked, family doesn't make each other eat in the kitchen at weddings. The elevator arrived at that perfect moment. I got in, and she tried to follow me inside, but I blocked the door with my arm. This conversation is over, I said firmly. Tyler, please, she said desperately. Victoria's getting divorced. She needs family support right now. This whole situation is so humiliating for her. Good for her, I replied. Maybe next time she'll think twice before treating people like garbage. The elevator doors closed before she could respond, and I finally had some peace and quiet. Over the next few days, they tried absolutely everything they could think of. Emails, text messages from distant relatives, even having my elderly grandmother call to guilt me into fixing the family. Each desperate attempt just confirmed that I had made the right choice by cutting them off completely. The most pathetic attempt was when my dad showed up at my office building. Security called to ask if I wanted to see him, and I told them I was in meetings all day and unavailable. He waited in the lobby for 4 solid hours, just sitting there reading magazines and hoping I would change my mind. When I finally left work through the back exit, I found a handwritten note tucked under my car's windshield wiper. It said, Son, please don't let pride destroy our family. We love you. We're sorry. Please come home. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the nearest trash can without a second thought. Connor was waiting at my apartment when I got home that evening. Dude, your dad looked like a lost puppy sitting in your office lobby today. The security guard said he just sat there reading the same magazine for hours. Good, I replied. Maybe now he knows what it feels like to wait around hoping someone else will give him what he wants. That weekend, I got a text message from Brandon with another update. Victoria's moving back in with your parents. Divorce will be final next month. Thought you should know she's been telling people you abandoned the family in their time of need. I replied, Thanks for the heads up. How are you holding up through all this? Best decision I ever made, he wrote back. Found out this whole wedding thing was just the tip of the iceberg with her behavior. Smart guy, I responded. He had learned what it took me 28 years to figure out. A month later, my parents tried one last manipulation tactic. They sent me a birthday card in the mail. Not a text, not a phone call, but an actual physical card that showed up in my mailbox. Inside the card was a check for $500 and a note that read, We know money isn't the real issue here, but we wanted to show we care. Please call us. I deposited their check without hesitation and threw the card directly in the trash. That money bought me a nice dinner at an expensive restaurant and a new set of golf clubs. It was a small payment toward the years of disrespect I had endured, but it was a start. Connor and I went out to celebrate my birthday properly that night. $500, he said, when I told him about the card. That's what they think your relationship is worth? Dude, you spent more than that on their anniversary dinner just last year. 6 months after the wedding disaster, I randomly ran into Brandon at the grocery store. He looked significantly better, healthier, more relaxed, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. We chatted for a few minutes about normal stuff like work, sports, and the weather. It was actually pleasant to have a conversation that wasn't loaded with family drama for once. As we were wrapping up our conversation, he said, You know, Victoria asks about you sometimes. She wonders if you'll ever forgive her for what happened. What do you tell her when she asks? I replied. That some things can't be unforgiven, just forgotten, he said thoughtfully. I nodded in agreement. Brandon understood consequences better than anyone in my family ever would. These days, I'm doing absolutely great. Work is going really well. I'm dating someone new who actually respects me, and I've got plans for another trip to Europe in the spring. Connor and I hang out regularly, and he never lets me forget that I dodged a major bullet by cutting them off. Best family breakup ever, he'll say whenever the topic comes up. You went from being an unpaid ATM to a world traveler in like 3 months. That's character development. My parents still send holiday cards every year. I still throw them away immediately without opening them. Victoria occasionally tries to friend me on social media under fake names and profiles. I block them immediately, every single time. They made their choice when they decided to treat me like hired help at the wedding I paid for. Now they get to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of their lives. It had been almost 8 months since the wedding disaster. Long enough for the silence to become my new normal, and for me to stop expecting any more reconciliation attempts from my family. I had stopped checking social media for family drama and had genuinely moved on with my life in every meaningful way. I was dating someone new, Jessica, a graphic designer I had met through work connections. She knew the basic story about my family situation, but didn't push me for details or try to convince me to reconcile with them. We were having dinner at her place when everything exploded again in a way I never could have anticipated. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it completely, but something about the first line made me sit up straight and pay attention. Hey, this might be completely out of line, but I really need to tell you something important. It's about Victoria's wedding and what really happened behind the scenes. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but I feel like you deserve to know the truth. Jessica noticed the change in my expression immediately. Everything okay? She asked with concern. I kept reading the messages as they continued to come through. This is Zach, Brandon's cousin. I helped with a lot of the wedding planning because I work in event management professionally. I saw all the original documents and communications. What your family did was way worse than you probably know. Another message came through almost immediately. 2 weeks before the wedding, your mom called with very specific instructions. She wanted you classified as vendor staff, so you'd be completely out of the way during the important parts of the reception. Victoria was on speakerphone during this call, and she laughed and said, "Perfect, he won't even notice." My stomach completely dropped as I read those words. Jessica was asking if I was okay, but her voice sounded far away and muffled. There's more, the next message continued. Your mom specifically said, we need his money but not his opinions during the family dinner planning. Victoria agreed to everything and said you were too controlling about family events, and this way you'd just shut up and pay for things. I had to set the phone down for a second to process what I was reading. Jessica moved closer and started reading over my shoulder. Holy shit, she said quietly, her eyes widening as she took in the messages. The messages kept coming with more devastating details. Brandon found out about all this 3 days after the wedding when he saw the original vendor contract with your name listed as financial guarantor instead of family member. That's when he realized they had completely scammed you, and he was absolutely furious. He started questioning Victoria about other stuff after that. They didn't just exclude you from dinner. They actively planned to humiliate you. Your mom said, he needs to learn his place in this family, and Victoria agreed completely. I have all of this documented in writing if you need proof. One final message came through. Brandon specifically asked me to contact you. He said you deserve to know the truth before you ever consider letting them back into your life. He's got all the documentation if you want it. I'm really sorry, man. What they did was deliberately cruel. I sat there for probably 10 minutes just processing everything I had learned. The emotions I felt weren't hurt or sadness. It was pure clarity. They hadn't made a mistake or gotten caught up in wedding stress like I had originally thought. They had deliberately planned to humiliate me while taking my money. Too controlling was particularly rich, considering I had never asked for anything except basic respect and decent treatment. Jessica was absolutely furious on my behalf. You need to do something with this information, she said. Like what? I asked. Expose them. Show people what they really are. But I realized I didn't actually need to do anything dramatic. They had already shown everyone who mattered exactly who they were. Victoria's divorce, my parents' desperate attempts to get me back, the family members who had reached out to support me. It all made perfect sense now. I replied to Zach, "Thanks for telling me this. Can you send me any documentation you have?" Within an hour, I had screenshots of text messages between my mom and Victoria planning my demotion to vendor status. There were email chains discussing how to manage Tyler's expectations at the wedding. There was even a group chat with extended family members where they joked about me not knowing my place. The evidence was absolutely damning, but more importantly, it was liberating. I forwarded everything to Brandon with a simple message. "Thanks for making sure I got this information." He replied immediately, "Least I could do? They tried to play both of us. I'm glad you're free of them. I had thought I lost a family when I cut them off, but I realized I had really just stopped feeding people who saw me as a resource instead of a person." The next morning, Connor came over for our usual weekend coffee routine. I showed him all the messages from Zach and the documentation he had provided. "Bro," he said after reading everything carefully, "this is absolutely insane. They literally had meetings about how to scam you, like actual conspiracy-level planning." "I know, part of me wishes I had this information earlier." "Nah, you handled it perfectly without knowing any of this," Connor said. "It makes it even better that your gut reaction was completely spot on. I deleted all the screenshots without looking at them again. I didn't need to keep evidence of their betrayal because I had already moved on with my life. Some truths don't set you free, they just confirm you were right to walk away in the first place."